Welcome to my documentary. I'm Funky the Dragon. This film's going to be about the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, or the UNCRC to you and me. This is supposed to protect kids' basic needs like survival and education, as well as guarantee that they get a say in decisions that are made about them, which is facts. In total, there are 54 points in the convention, which they call articles. And later, if I can be bothered, I'll go into detail about exactly what they're supposed to do. We're also going to take a look at how kids are getting involved in reporting back to the UN about children's rights in their country. Next, we go onto the streets and find out what the kids of Wales would like to change about the way they're treated and what they're doing about it. But first, you need some history. The children's rights movement started at the beginning of the 20th century. This was after Europe had been mangled by the First World War. People still disagree about why it happened, but in 1914, all the most powerful countries in the world gathered their healthy young people together, lined them up on opposing sides of the battlefield, and sent them rushing in at each other's bullets and bayonets. 9 million people died in the fighting over the next 5 years, and millions of kids across Europe were made orphans. Eglantine Jebb, a teacher from England, was so disgusted by the slaughter, she decided to dedicate her life to campaigning for children's rights. She helped found Save the Children and wrote the Declaration of the Rights of the Child, which attempted to pressure those governments which had survived the war into protecting children. The winners of the war, minus America, founded the League of Nations, which they said was a way to guarantee peace and help prevent world wars from happening. On the positive side, in 1924 the League adopted the Declaration of the Rights of the Child, but they totally failed in their main mission. Afraid that Europe would go communist if they intervened, the League did nothing to prevent fascists from taking power. First, Mussolini in Italy, then Hitler in Germany, then Franco in Spain gained control of their governments and acted with open aggression against all other countries and their own people. Inevitably, World War II broke out, again with the parent killing and the carnage. This time, even more millions of people were killed in the First World War, even more children orphaned. Anyone who the Nazis decided were from the wrong race or religion, or held wrong political beliefs, were sent to concentration camps, either to be worked to death at hard labour, or to be herded into underground chambers in gas. When the soldiers came for the Jewish orphans in the Warsaw Ghetto, Janusz Korczak, a popular children's author and paediatrician, refused to abandon the children in his care. Janusz was offered the chance to escape, but instead he chose to stay with the children and died in the gas chamber in Treblinka. After the war, once his story had become known, Korczak became a hero of the children's rights movement. Hitler was defeated in 1945, and the governments of Russia, the United Kingdom, France and other winners, including this time America, formed the United Nations, whose purpose, they said, was
to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war.
Unfortunately, the most powerful countries, especially America and Russia, couldn't hold out for very long. They barely sat on the sofa of peace before they started arguing about ownership of the remote control. They called this the Cold War, and got busy developing nuclear weapons in the arms race, cutting off trade to each other, and fighting proxy wars in South America, Korea and Vietnam. Despite all this, the United Nations carried on, raised an umbrella to keep the napalm off, and signed the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, committing the governments of all countries to respecting the right to life, to liberty, to freedom of expression and association, and to education. The United Nations has survived until the present day, and is one of the main places that the children's rights movement applies pressure in its campaigns. After the war, the UN immediately adopted Eglantine Declaration, expanding it in 1959 to a list of 10 rights. It took 30 years before the next major result, when in 1989 they adopted the much longer Convention on the Rights of the Child. which also lays down how the government of each country has to report back on children's rights. The convention is one of the most popular in the United Nations. All but 2 of the 191 member states have accepted it into law. One is Somalia, which has been in civil war for 30 years, and the other is America.
The UNCRC is the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. An UN convention is basically an international law.
In a simple way, it's a promise that the international community has made to children to respect the rights of children. It was adopted in 1989 by the United Nations General Assembly, and it came into force in 1990.
It's a law that the members of the United Nations sign up to. Now, they don't always all sign up to a convention, but the Convention on the Rights of the Child is the one that everybody signed up to very, very quickly.
It's a list of rights that every child, every person under the age of 18 has.
So, my lovelies, what are the rights?
Like the right to a name, the right to education,
safety and security. The article one is every young person has got the right to these articles.
to have a voice in certain decisions that affect us.
There's all sorts, there's things like protection from sexual assault.
Being heard. It's all about young people being heard. I think that's the most important thing, to be honest.
Just very simple ones like the right to education, the right to play, the right to choose your own religion without parents forcing you to go a certain way, and things like that. So they spread from a very, very wide range to everyday lifestyle, to maybe part-time jobs or education, how you're treated in school.
Hang on a minute now. Before we go on, you need to know what a right is. A right is something everyone was born with. No one can take your rights away from you, no matter what happens to you in your life. Everyone has rights. They're not just exclusive to old people, so remember, kids have rights too.
It's the most widely ratified of all the human rights instruments, so this gives it sort of great significance. It's really sort of powerfully endorsed, so it really gives children's rights massive recognition across the world. In the past and even today, even though the Convention is trying to change things, children have very limited access to influence the media, to influence what's happening in courts. They have limited access to political participation. They don't have the vote like adults.
It's the most comprehensive collection of children's rights, and by signing up to the Convention, people are saying, yes, we want to see these rights for our children in this country.
So there loves in UNCRC. I reckon you will too. But how does the UN make sure things get done?
The UN Convention on the Rights of the Child is different to lots of other conventions in a few ways. One of the ways it's different is that it's got a reporting process. So every few years, every country who signed up has got to report back to the UN and say, look, this is how things are going on children's rights in our country. And the UN will look at that and then will feed back and saying, well, that's great to see that you're doing so well in this area, but it doesn't look as if you're doing so well in this area, and we're very worried about that area.
The United Nations recognises that governments may not always have the information and may not always be forthcoming in that information. So with every government they meet, they also have a second group of non-governmental organisations, NGOs, that come along, and the NGOs then present their case.
They have another role in reporting in that they can then do an alternative report, which is basically a critique of the state party report. It's basically trying to show whether the state party is saying what it's saying is true, whether it's adequate, whether it's actually reflecting children's experiences.
Further to that, 12 countries have also had some form of representation from children and young people.
We're writing a report on the UNCRC, just basically saying how it's being carried out in Wales, what's good about it, what's bad about it. We can say anything we like in this report. it's going to be good. They have to listen to us.
The report is young people's reaction to the UNCRC and what they think about it, and how many people actually really know about it, which is probably not going to be a lot.
It's important to sort of keep the government in check, I suppose, make sure they're doing what they want to do right. Most importantly, why we're doing it is because we want to take an impartial stance, so we can perhaps influence both the non-government organisations and the government into writing their reports to make sure young people's voices are actually heard.
Did you get all that? The first two reports are written by different sets of old people. The first one's written by the government, the second by organisations who can criticise the government, and the third by a group of people who all this effort is supposed to benefit. You kids.